I don't know what took me to the Falkland Islands, or rather, I'm not sure which of a number of motivations was the one really behind this unconventional journey. Like most people, the first I ever heard of the place was in 1982, the Falklands War. But the Falklands plucked other strings for me as well. I have always been attracted to barren, elemental landscapes, mountain peaks, lonesome coastlines, the high desert. So the Falklands' panoramas of pasty yellow grass, swept by flurries of chill wind, the bones of the land poking through, was familiar, reminded me of many places I'd been before, and I have always been intrigued by the drama and melancholy of shipwreck waters. Stanley Harbour is dotted with the hulks of ancient mariners, their skeletons brooding in the dark water, leaning haphazardly as time wears them down into dampened graves. But would the pull of these huge pale landscapes of stone and light really have been enough to draw me to the remote perimeter of the Southern Ocean? Would I, or anyone, have heard of the place had it not been for that odd little war? The one the locals insist on calling just the conflict, as if it were a mere quarrel between old friends, which it most definitely was not. I have a memory, still fresh after 25 years, of sitting on my living room floor, a 12-year-old boy, watching a victory parade snake through the streets of London and across my TV screen. The war had just ended, coincidentally on my birthday, and what I watched was the typical outpouring of martial pride, millions of flags, the nation's leaders beaming at a sea of ecstatic citizens, triumphant music evoking victories of old. To a little kid, it all seemed so exciting, so fulfilling. I didn't know it, but I was feeling the age-old stirrings of patriotism and military conquest, even if one culture removed from my own. I was envious of these exultant people, of the soldiers who had done great deeds, of the canny and steadfast generals, the proud mothers welcoming home their warrior sons. You know, I mused with the innocent candour of a child, I think what we need is a war. My father was 49 when I was born, as close in age to my maternal grandparents as to my mother. He was a gregarious man, engaging, was essentially fond of other human beings, but I was aware of a long, faintly mysterious, undiscussed life stretching back into the early 20th century, of old family tragedies and feuds, of journeys and disappointments, carefully forgotten or buried, a sepia life, occasionally emerging for an instant over a newspaper obituary or unexpected reminiscence. In the 1940s he had been of fighting age, but his work made him exempt. His war burden was instead to see his sister's husbands waste away from drink and despair in the years that followed, to help raise their children, to rise at dawn each Remembrance Day to stand in the chill morning with a poppy in his lapel as the bugle cried. In my life I almost never saw him angry, nor express any great passion at all, but that winter's evening, when his son expressed a 12-year-old's naive fascination for martial glory, he swore fiercely. He railed furiously, and left me in no doubt that I had uttered some monstrous obscenity, until my mother calmed him, reminded him that I was just a boy. How could I understand? It might be too much to suggest that this moment alone set the mould for the pacifist I have become, I think, today, but it certainly left me with the sense that there was something murderous and vile that betrayed those adolescent feelings of triumph and glorious victory. When in the Falklands, it's difficult to escape the war. The sign in the shop window declaring eternal enmity to the Argentinians, the whitewashed insignia on a stone wall that once strove to differentiate a civilian house from a military target, the man in the curiosity shop whose tales of the conflict only hint at other stories, still too raw to tell. Overhead, jet fighters wheel, military trucks trundle between the rows of village cottages, and of course, there are the neat rows of graves in the cemetery on the outskirts of town. To my surprise, wandering about the town and talking to its gently peculiar people, I felt a whisper of that 12-year-old's bellicose stirring, an echo of the sheer indignation they must have felt to wake one bitter morning to the sound of tanks trundling down their miniature streets, rifle butts banging angrily on doors, shouted demands, guns levelled at loved ones, their possessions scattered and defaced, rounded up like cattle and robbed of their peace. How could such a thing be allowed to stand, I thought? What other course of action but to bring justice to these people, to spill blood, if one must, to right this wrong? Could pacifism withstand such provocation? During my stay, the beautifully bleak hills west of Stanley drew me. A local walking pamphlet assured me that these were at least thought to be clear of mines. These hills, protecting the capital, had seen some of the most desperate and most pointless and bloody fighting, as a better trained and equipped British force overran the last remnants of resistance to retake Stanley. Here and there among the grazing sheep and nodding grass were strips of barbed wire, shell holes full of silent, wine-dark peat water, a rusting jeep or two. I climbed to Mount William, scrambling among the rocks to gain a sweeping view of the Stanley Peninsula's southern shore, where apparently nuclear submarines now dock. From there I trekked across a broad saddle and plodded up the slopes of Mount Tumbledown, a name that rang with memory from breathless newspaper accounts of the last hours of the fighting. The sun was warm on my back. A rook wheeled in leisurely arcs overhead. Stanley Water shimmered in the distance, the tiny dots of the town's houses huddling on the shore. As I approached the peak, I spied a brilliant red flower emerging from a nest of stones. A little beyond was another, stark contrast to the muted greys, greens and yellows of this windy hilltop. Suddenly, the stones resolved into two tiny cairns, the flowers into plastic scarlet poppies, faded a little by the dazzling sun. 25 years ago, 2 soldiers had fallen here, exactly here. At the summit proper was a slender metal cross, standing sentinel above a glorious sweep of craggy hills. I sat on that hilltop for a good part of the afternoon, trying to fathom how a place of such beauty could witness such terrible violence and tragedy, only to be left again to the tiny buzz of sandflies, the rustling grass, the gentle whistle of the breeze among the rocks. Could outrage, the thirst for justice, survive such terrible sadness? I don't know what my father would have thought of my eccentric voyage to this obscure hilltop. He died a couple of years before I went, his ashes committed to another rocky coastline lapped by the icy southern ocean. But I wonder now at the part he may have played in not only spurring my journey to those obscure islands at the edge of the world, but also a journey to the very edge of what I understand, even now.